My name is Ethan, and I have never been able to forget what I saw in that forest. I was camping alone beside a quiet, glassy lake, the kind that perfectly reflects the sky above. The forest surrounded me in every direction, dense and undisturbed. It was supposed to be a peaceful getaway, a chance to escape the stress of everyday life. But then I saw my reflection move on its own. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the water. The surface rippled slightly, distorting my face, but when the water stilled, something felt wrong. My reflection stood there, staring back at me, its expression just slightly off. A smirk that I hadn't made, eyes that weren't quite my own. I blinked. The reflection didn't. A shiver ran down my spine. I splashed the water, disrupting the image, and backed away from the lake. The fire crackled behind me, a comforting sound in the unsettling silence of the woods. Maybe I was just tired, but as I lay in my tent that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. Then I heard the footsteps, soft, deliberate, crunching against the damp forest floor. I held my breath, my fingers gripping the zipper of my tent. I listened, counting the steps. They stopped just outside. I wasn't alone. Slowly, I reached for my flashlight, hand trembling. Taking a deep breath, I unzipped the tent just enough to peek outside. Nothing. The fire had burned down to embers, casting long shadows across the trees. The lake was still and dark, reflecting the moon's pale light. I exhaled shakily and zipped the tent back up. Maybe it was an animal. Maybe the forest was playing tricks on me. Then I heard a whisper, not from outside, from inside the tent. My body went rigid. The voice was low, almost playful. "Why did you leave?" Every nerve in my body screamed at me to move, to run, but I was frozen. My mind raced ahead. Someone slipped into my tent while I was distracted. Was I losing it? Summoning every ounce of courage, I flicked on the flashlight and turned empty. I was alone. I scrambled out of the tent, gasping for air, my flashlight swinging wildly through the trees. Nothing. I turned toward the lake, my heart hammering against my ribs, and there it was, my reflection. Standing at the water's edge, not mimicking me, watching me. Then, slowly, it stepped forward, not toward me, out of the water. I ran. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. My body moved on pure instinct, crashing through the undergrowth, branches slashing at my arms. I didn't stop until I reached my car, breathless and shaking. The next morning, I convinced myself it had been a nightmare. The exhaustion, the darkness, it had all played tricks on my mind. But as I drove past the lake, I made the mistake of glancing at my rearview mirror. My reflection was still there, and it was smiling. My name is David, and I am still trying to convince myself that what happened in that forest was real. I had always loved hiking alone, escaping into the wilderness where the world felt quieter. That's why I chose the deep trails of Black Hollow Forest. The path was well marked, the air crisp with the scent of pine, and for the first few hours, it was everything I had hoped for. Then, I started noticing the loop. It began with small things. A fallen tree that I was sure I had passed before. A strangely shaped rock that looked eerily familiar. At first I told myself it was just paranoia, that the forest was playing tricks on me. But as the hours stretched on, I realized the truth. I was walking in circles. I checked my GPS, but the screen refused to load. My phone, which had been at 50% battery, was now dead. Panic threatened to take hold, but I forced myself to breathe. I had been hiking for years. I could find my way back, or so I thought. I changed direction, deliberately stepping off the trail, hoping to find a landmark that would lead me out. But no matter which way I went, I always ended up back at the same spot. The loop was unbreakable. Night fell quicker than I expected. The trees cast long, stretching shadows, and an eerie silence settled over the forest. My flashlight flickered as I set up a small fire, trying to calm my nerves. Then I heard the footsteps, soft, deliberate, circling just beyond the glow of my fire. I held my breath, gripping the small knife in my pack. "Hello?" I called, my voice swallowed by the darkness. No answer, only the slow, shuffling steps, as if something was testing the edge of the light, waiting. I didn't sleep. Every time my eyes grew heavy, the sound would return. A dry rustling, a whisper of movement just beyond my sight. By dawn, my mind was in tatters. I had to move. I packed my things and forced my aching legs to keep going. But the nightmare continued. Each turn, each desperate sprint forward, brought me back to the same cursed clearing. The forest refused to let me go. Then, as I stood there, gasping in exhaustion, I noticed something new. Footprints, not mine, and not just one set, dozens of them. Overlapping, crisscrossing in every direction, as if countless others had walked this very same loop before me. And some of them lead deeper into the woods. I followed them, my heart hammering in my chest. The trees grew denser, the air heavier, and then, in the distance, I saw it. A figure tall, motionless, standing at the edge of the path. It had no face, only a void, where features should have been, and yet, I knew it was watching me. Then it raised its hand and pointed. To my horror, I followed its direction back to where I had come from, back to the cursed path. The moment I turned back, the figure was gone. I ran. I don't know how long I ran, but suddenly, I stumbled out onto a road. A passing car stopped, the driver's concerned face swimming in my vision. I turned to point at the forest behind me, but the path was gone, vanished. Now, whenever I pass by that part of the forest, I feel it. A pull, a whisper at the edge of my mind. The loop is still there, and it's waiting for someone else to take the wrong step. My name is Daniel, and I wish I had never agreed to that camping trip. It was supposed to be a simple weekend getaway, me, Jake, and Olivia, just 3 friends, escaping the stress of city life. The forest was vast, its towering trees forming a natural cathedral above us. The first night was peaceful, with only the occasional crackling of the firewood, and the distant calls of nocturnal creatures filling the air. Then came the whispers at first. I thought I was imagining them. A faint murmuring just beyond the tree line, barely audible over the wind. But as the night deepened, the voices grew clearer. They weren't the rustling of leaves or the distant chatter of other campers. No, these whispers carried words. My name. I shot up from my sleeping bag, heart pounding. Olivia stirred beside me. "Did you hear that?" She mumbled sleepily. I hesitated. "Yeah, I think someone's out there." Jake, who had been keeping watch by the dying embers of the fire, turned to us. "You guys are overreacting. It's probably just the wind." But I wasn't convinced. I strained my ears, trying to catch the sounds again. For a moment, silence. Then, like a breath against my ear, the whisper returned. "Daniel, ... I recoiled, scrambling out of my tent. The trees swayed gently, their shadows shifting under the pale moonlight. My breath came in shallow gasps as I scanned the forest. Nothing, and yet, the presence felt undeniable. Jake sighed, shaking his head. "Dude, get some sleep. You're spooking yourself." I tried. I really did. But the whispers continued, and they weren't just calling my name anymore. They were telling me things, secrets, deep, buried secrets that I had never spoken aloud. Regrets from my childhood, moments of shame I had tried to forget. They slithered into my mind like creeping vines, wrapping around my thoughts until I could no longer ignore them. By the second night, I was losing it. Olivia noticed first. "Daniel, you look awful. You barely slept?" I nodded absently, gripping my knees. I wanted to tell them, but how could I? How do you explain that the forest itself is whispering your darkest thoughts back at you? Then Jake spoke up, his voice unusually quiet, actually. I think I heard them too. A chill ran through me. Olivia turned pale. This isn't funny, Jake. I'm not joking, he said, rubbing his temples. Last night, I kept hearing someone calling my name, and they knew things. Stuff even you guys don't know about me. The three of us sat in tense silence. The realization settled in. This wasn't just paranoia. We weren't imagining it. Something was listening to us that night. We tried to stay awake together. We kept the fire burning high, surrounding ourselves with its flickering light. But the whispers didn't care. They came anyway. Soft, sinuous voices that slithered between the trees, weaving through the night air. Each whisper cutting into our minds like a blade. Jake, ... Olivia, ... Daniel, ... I gripped Olivia's hand, feeling her tremble. We're leaving at first light, I whispered. Jake nodded, his face pale and sweat-slicked. Agreed. Dawn couldn't come fast enough. The moment the first light of the sun touched the trees, we packed up, moving quickly, barely speaking. But as we left the campsite behind, I felt a prickle on the back of my neck. A final whisper drifted to my ears, almost affectionate. See you again soon, Daniel. I didn't look back, and I never will. My name is Eric, and I swear something was hunting me in that forest. It started as a solo hiking trip, a chance to disconnect from the noise of daily life. The woods were dense, the trails winding and unpredictable, but I had my map, my gear, and a good sense of direction. Or so I thought. By the second day, I noticed something odd. The forest felt too quiet. No birds, no rustling leaves, just silence, except for the sound of my own footsteps. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe I was just overthinking it. Then I saw the footprints. They weren't mine. I stopped dead in my tracks, my heart hammering. The prints were fresh, leading in the same direction I had been walking. But there was no one else on the trail. I would have heard them. I would have seen them. Swallowing my unease, I kept moving. Maybe someone had passed through earlier. Maybe. The damp earth made the tracks look newer than they were. But as I continued, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. That night, I set up camp in a small clearing. The fire crackled softly as I ate my dinner, trying to shake off my paranoia. But the woods were watching I could feel it. Every rustling leaf made me jump. Every creaking branch sent my pulse racing. Then, just beyond the fire's glow, I heard it. A twig snapping. I turned sharply, flashlight in hand, but there was nothing. Just the dense wall of trees surrounding my camp. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I wasn't alone. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I swore I heard breathing soft, measured, too close. When dawn broke, I packed up in record time and started hiking back toward the main trail. That's when I saw the new footprints, right next to mine. They hadn't been there before, and worse, they weren't just beside mine. They overlapped them, step for step, as if something had been walking right behind me the whole time. I ran. Branches whipped against my face. Roots threatened to trip me, but I didn't stop. My lungs burned, my legs screamed, but I kept going. The feeling of being chased was unbearable. I swore I could hear something heavy, unnatural footsteps pounding the earth behind me. But every time I dared to glance back, there was nothing. I reached my car just as the sun was setting, practically throwing myself inside and locking the doors. My hands shook as I fumbled with the keys. The engine roared to life, and I tore out of there without looking back. But as I reached the highway, my phone buzzed with a new notification. A photo. It was a picture of me, taken from behind, deep in the woods. And in the corner of the frame, almost too dark to see, was a shadowy figure, standing just a few feet away. I never hiked alone again. My name is Mark, and I should have never sought shelter in that cabin. I was deep in the woods, miles away from civilization, when the storm rolled in. The rain came down in sheets, drenching me within seconds. My map was soaked, my phone had no signal, and the trails had turned into muddy rivers. Desperation pushed me forward until I stumbled upon an old wooden cabin nestled between the trees. It looked abandoned, but at that moment, anything was better than freezing in the storm. I pushed open the creaking door and stepped inside. The air was thick with dust and the scent of damp wood. The place was empty, no furniture, no signs of recent life. Only a battered fireplace and a warped wooden floor greeted me. Relieved, I dropped my backpack and tried to get warm by the fireplace. That's when I noticed the stains at first. They looked like old watermarks on the floorboards. But as I took a closer look, the dark red hue became unmistakable. Dried blood. And it wasn't just a single stain. It trailed across the room, leading to a small, broken trapdoor in the corner. A rational person would have left, but the storm was relentless, and curiosity gnawed at me. I reached down and pulled at the trapdoor. It groaned in protest, before snapping open, revealing a steep, dark descent. Then, I heard a faint shuffling sound from below. My breath caught in my throat. I shone my flashlight into the opening, illuminating a narrow stone staircase disappearing into the darkness. The sound came again, like something shifting just out of sight. I should have left. I should have bolted out of that cabin and braved the storm. But something about that darkness pulled at me, a terrible, morbid fascination. I stepped down. The air grew colder with each step. The stench of decay filled my nose. My flashlight flickered as if protesting my decision. The staircase opened into a small, windowless room with stone walls covered in deep scratch marks. Chains dangled from the ceiling, rusted but still strong. And then I saw the bed. A rotting, blood-soaked mattress sat in the center of the room. Something had struggled here. Something had died here. A whisper of movement came from the shadows. I spun around, my flashlight shaking. A figure stood at the far end of the room, barely more than a silhouette. It was tall, impossibly thin, its limbs elongated in a way that made my stomach twist. Its head tilted slightly, as if it were studying me. Then it moved. Not a step, not a shuffle, but a sudden, impossible shift, like reality itself had glitched. One moment, it was at the far wall. The next, inches from my face. I ran, scrambling up the stairs. I didn't dare look back. The sound of something chasing me echoed in my ears, long, jagged breaths, nails scraping against stone. As I burst into the cabin, the storm's howling wind drowned out everything else. I slammed the trapdoor shut and threw myself outside, sprinting into the rain. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. Days later, I returned with the police. The storm had passed, but the cabin was gone. No trace of it remained. Just an empty patch of earth where it had once stood. But I know what I saw, and I know that it's still out there, waiting for someone else to step inside.